Playoff survivors. We're heading into the semifinals of the Fantasy Major League Rugby playoffs, which means there is only 4 teams remaining. We take a look back at an exciting round 15 in Major League Rugby that got us up to this point, and look ahead to a round 16 that is going to decide who will be competing for a Fantasy MLR Championship. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 68 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. We got an exciting week of rugby to break down for you in this episode. Playoff implication, fantasy playoff implications. That's what we're all going to be talking about today. Ryan Yee, Matt Yee here in the flesh with me as the Yee brothers are out on the road here. An exciting jam-packed episode. Lots of playoff rugby to talk about here.
Yeah, lots of playoff rugby, lots of fantasy playoff rugby to talk about. You know, Vandy can't be here to celebrate a toilet bowl win. We know how important those toilet bowl wins are. But yeah, it was a big week. I got to take a break, got to sit back, relax. Didn't have to worry too much about the guys playing, and just focus on who I was playing next week. Yeah,
Matt, you had that bye heading into round 15. A little bit of a weird feeling for you, not having to stress out about, as you dive closer and deeper into the world of fantasy MLR and fantasy sports in general, we always have that feeling of that angst that there's a little bit something missing when you don't have that extra layer of fantasy stress. How was it for you kind of dealing with that? You got to scout out the opponents a little bit as they duked it out to see who you'd be playing in the first round. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I got to sit back and finally just be a fan of the MLR rather than having to always look for my guys and get mad at them for not scoring a try, get mad at them for not going an extra meter or passing the ball and making the right decision. I could finally just watch the game. So it was good, but I'm excited to get back into it. It's big time now.
Missing it. You're still missing it.
Got to get into the semifinals. That's all I'm thinking about at this point.
There you go. All right, we're going to break that all down for you in this episode, of course. We're going to talk about those fantasy MLR playoffs and a Fantasy Ruckers League update. Who bought their way into the Fantasy Ruckers League semifinal? Who's going to keep themselves alive here for a race for this Fantasy Ruckers League Championship? Of course, we're going to have a little news and notes segment of the latest happenings around the league. Break down that round 15 that got us up to this point that had no shortage of exciting rugby that obviously lended itself to an exciting weekend of fantasy rugby. Lots of points scored, it seemed like, in this one. Yep. Talk a little bit about the waiver wire, who might be available, how you're going to approach this as we continue to trudge along here in this fantasy playoff stretch. And of course, talk about a round 16 that I mentioned in the teaser is going to decide who will be competing for that Fantasy Ruckers League Championship, which is an exciting one. So, but before we get into any of that, of course, if you aren't already, give us a follow at the Fantasy Ruckers. The handles are all there up above on the YouTube video there above us. You can check down low in the description as well if you're listening on the podcast. We also have a Discord community that's been a lot of fun, a lot of people interacting within there, talking a lot of rugby, MLR, fantasy MLR, and even beyond that as well. And then we even have a website that has been a game changer for this year as well, thefantasyruckers.com. If you're a stat head, we know we got our good friend James Dealey, who's been a pivotal part of this project. He's obviously into all the stats, and we have it all there on thefantasyruckers.com. If you like fantasy points, all of that can be checked there. You can check out the matchups and all that. So make sure you head there and have a nice little peruse through that, because it's been a whole lot of fun being able to track that this season as opposed to last season. A little bit of time for reflection as we get towards the tail end of this one. But let's get right into it. Let's talk about some news and notes, Matt, because even though we might be getting towards the tail end of the season, there seems to be still no shortage of kind of exciting news that's happening around the league.Maybe not as much from a fantasy implication, but nonetheless still some pretty solid stuff. I would say the one that probably has the biggest implication moving forward here right now is a couple teams locking up their playoff spots moving forward here. Two teams, obviously the two top, one in the Eastern Conference, one in the Western Conference, the San Diego Legion, locking up their playoff spot, and so do the New England Free Jacks as well. And the reason why I say that there might be some fantasy implications in this one is because we might start to see some of these teams starting to rest some of their big-time guys. They are still fighting, maybe not so much for the New England Free Jacks, but the San Diego Legion are still fighting for that top spot in the Western Conference to get that first-round bye. So maybe not as much for them, but hey, on the New England side, you may see some of these guys getting some rest as we get towards the tail end of the season, which may have an effect over the next 2 weeks here, the biggest 2 weeks of the Fantasy MLR season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thought that I had. I mean, we already saw a little bit, and we'll get into it when we look at the games. We already saw San Diego kind of pulling a lot of their guys off once they got into a big lead. So maybe we can expect to see more of that. The MLR clearly doesn't even know their own playoff implications because they, for whatever reason, were tweeting out that the San Diego Legion had clinched the Western Conference top spot. But I don't know. I mean, you would think that the league would understand their own playoff destiny and their own playoff scenarios. But look, I guess even they're new to their own playoff structure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, shifting on from that, some more stuff that maybe not as much fantasy implied, but kind of a shocking announcement here from the Old Glory DC front office that head coach Josh Sims, after starting this season, this is his very first season in the MLR, is departing for bigger and better things. He'll be joining Zebra Parma in the part of the URC, I believe, over in Italy as an assistant coach role. I think he's a forwards coach going into that. Pretty shocking. I don't know. I think for this, it's kind of interesting because obviously Old Glory DC, they do find themselves in a playoff spot, second right now in the East. So they have made a huge, vast improvement from last season under the helm of Josh Sims. But the fact that he's moving on, an announcement that's happening within a year of him being with the club, it's hard to build club stability when you have kind of movement like that. So it should be interesting how this kind of impacts, maybe not Old Glory DC this season, but as we look ahead towards future fantasy seasons, could have a big impact.
I mean, we look at every sport, and when there's a constant coaching changes, the team never really seems to be able to perform. And I mean, we'll have to see what the impact is, but you're looking at some of these successful teams where they have the same coach for a while, and they're having time to implement. Teams are able to get used to what the structure is, the game plan is, and it's vital for rugby. And it'll be a tough one for them. And I mean, even though they're in the second spot, they're not having an amazing season.
Sure,
the Eastern Conference just sucks.
That is a blunt way to put it. Definitely a twofold kind of contrasting things when you look at the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference. That is for sure. A little bit lighter news. The MLR coming out with some sweet jerseys. And Matt, you know how much of a guy I am when it comes to collared jerseys. And when you're coming out with the vintage jersey in the MLR, that's one thing that there's going to be a lot of. I mean, and there was that in their release here.
What the heck? You just slap a collar on it and you call it vintage? I don't understand. Well, the Toronto Arrows jersey, it's the exact same. It just has a collar. The Rugby New York jersey, it's the exact same as last year's. It just has a collar. Is last year vintage now? Is that the NOLA Gold jersey? Pretty much the same. It's just not in quarters and it has a collar. Like, I don't... what is even the point of calling these vintage jerseys? I can glue a collar onto one of the current jerseys if I really wanted a vintage one. I will say I have to give it to the Utah Warriors. Classic them coming out with the sweet jersey. They got a rodeo vintage jersey, no collar, but it's got a bull on the front. So I mean, I love to see that. A little bit more creativity than the Chicago Hounds slapping a green jersey or, the 7 out of 12 teams putting on pinstripes.
How much respect would you have had for a team if they went with the old school cotton long sleeve rugby jerseys and it had the collar?
All the respect. I would have all the respect. That is truly vintage. I mean, but look, the MLR is 5 years old. What type of vintage are you trying to look at? There is no vintage in it. Just say collared jersey.
I will say, I like the Free Jacks ones. They look kind of, different. They go with the cursive style writing.
It looks like the Bulls. You look at them, they look like the Chicago City Edition Bulls ones.
But different font.
And I don't understand. Why are they, they're auctioning these off to try and make a couple more bucks. Why don't they just sell them? I'm sure people would buy them. The Rugby Atlanta one looks sweet. They debuted another jersey on the weekend, which looks sweet. But I don't know.
You just find out that money's getting auctioned off for charity, and you're going to feel horrible about it. So
Probably will.
So, all right, moving on. Well, that was the news and notes for this episode. Again, interesting with those playoff spots that have been clinched. The playoff spots that have been clinched here, which may have an implication on these next 2 weeks are remaining in the fantasy playoff world. Of course, Josh Sims leaving, and then the vintage collared jerseys that are going to add a little bit of a spice, I guess.
Vintage new collared jerseys.
But all right, let's shift on over to a quick Fantasy Ruckers League update, and this might be the biggest and most important update outside of the ones that we've had in terms of that playoff race that was heated heading into this elimination round that we've had. But nonetheless, a pretty exciting weekend of rugby when it came to the Fantasy Ruckers League. Again, like we mentioned at the top of the show, Matt, you had a bye finishing top of the league in the regular season play. Rugby Morning getting a bye because they finished second. Top two teams moving on. So we had the seeds 3 through 6 duking out to see who would get their ticket, the lucky ones, to face you in the first round of the playoffs. It was MLR Stats taking on Lads on Tour, our former 2022 and only so far Fantasy MLR champion. And then we had on the other side of the bracket the Dankest Anchors taking on first-time league member Rugby Wrap-Up, Matt McCarthy's Rugby Wrap-Up squad. And hey, it came close for at least one of the matches. MLR Stats beating the MLR, the most recent Fantasy MLR champion, John of Lads on Tour, 99.7 to 88.9 on the back of a massive Robbie Povey performance that obviously we're going to break down in that matchup there. But hey, the playoff race ends for our most recent and only MLR champion and continues for a brand new league member, numbers guy, James Dealey of MLR Stats.
I mean, look, at the start of the season, we talked about we were going to be scared of this guy. This guy looks at the numbers every day, every hour, every second. He is MLR Stats. And yeah, clearly someone to be feared. And I think Rugby Morning's going to have a tough time with him, you know. Rugby Morning, Fitzy, you're going to have a tough time. That's all I can say.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I know that in our Discord chat, James and was talking about how there was just so much that he was trying to figure out.
To say about that Discord chat.
heading into this matchup. John obviously having a pretty strong squad, hard one to kind of read and see where he's going to go. I know there were some last minute lineup changes that kind of fell into that, but hey, it seems like James made all the right choices, coming away with the win, booking himself in the semifinal, and like you mentioned, we'll be facing Fitzy's Rugby Morning squad in that side of the semifinal. Winner of that one will get into the fantasy championship.
And hey, the big thing about this is nobody has to be scared about Bodine Walker anymore.
That's true.
John put the big money down. He's out. Bodine Walker looked like he was coming back into form over the weekend. We'll get into that. But yeah, now there's no more scaries of the Walker. No more Waka scaries.
No Waka Flocka Flame scaries.
Exactly.
All right. And then the other side of the bye round bracket, I should say, Dankest Anchors. Hokie, longtime league member, taking on Matt McCarthy's Rugby Wrap-Up squad. Taking care of business. Pretty handily here, 109 points to 74.9. He buys his ticket into the semifinal to take on you. Any worries here? You scared a little bit? You're facing a veteran league member. He seems to be putting in a lot of the work, making a lot of big time pickups heading into this round. Seems to be getting pretty hot here. We'll see.
This guy loves the Houston SaberCats. We can see the Houston SaberCats going on a little bit down. I think it's perfect timing for me to face him. So it works for me. Sorry, not this Houston SaberCats.
Yeah.
Hoagie's a San Diego Legion fan.
Yeah.
I hate to beat you with your own guys. I mean, Nate Hofsberger and Richard Judd. I mean, I'm sorry to do this to you next round, but
there you go.
But look, but when we get into this, there is a lot of collusion going on in that Discord chat, Ryan. There's a lot of collusion. There's a lot of I don't want to see rock and roll win. I can't wait to see rock and roll get taken down. Rock and roll stinks. Rock and roll has a poop emoji. It's getting ridiculous.
It is.
And there's only one way to quiet the haters. AKA the whole league, and that's by just getting my name on the jersey, and so that's exactly what I'm going to do.
All right, I love the confidence. Yeah, it is funny how I think no matter where you go, they always kick you while you're down, whether it's last season and you're at the bottom of the league.
Or if I have a 3-game losing streak at the end of the year when I've already clinched the top spot and I'm like 7 wins on top of Rugby Morning.
There you go. Yeah, I have no idea. I don't think you can do any right here. I think you will always feel the wrath of the Fantasy Ruckers
League. That's all right.
League.
So it pays to be the villain sometimes.
Yeah, you know what? It adds that extra layer of motivation, I guess. And we will mention it. I mean, we talked about the toilet bowl is still going on right now. The Rucking Goat taking on MLR All Access is Gimme the Loots. Been a tough season for Gimme the Loots. Finally comes to an end. Vandy puts them out of their misery. We said it in shows before. Every league, including the MLR, needs their version of the Dallas Jackals, or I guess in this case, that's true. It's changing. It's changing. The Chicago Hounds or the Toronto Arrows. And so the Rucking Goat, Vandy, even though he couldn't be here today, gets that job done.
Big win, Vandy.
Yeah, big win.
Go, man.
We'll see him in the final of the Toilet Bowl. And then Eagles Overseas taking on the Feral Hippies. It was a kind of a tougher season for Bill Baker's Eagles Overseas team in his first year part of the league. Obviously, big learning experience. He falls short to a longtime veteran and passionate MLR fan. I saw him, I believe, at one of the matches over the weekend, Stephen Lowen.
Look, Stephen is the best toilet bowl fantasy manager in our league. This is back-to-back toilet bowl finals for him. Way to go. Way to go, Steven. Look, you're doing great. The toilet bowl is one that matters. You can be a big old holder of that 6-pack of Charmin again this year.
There you go. Well, 70.6 to 53.1 for Steven, and he'll take on Vandy in, I guess, Vandy's first ever final. And in the history of his existence with this league, and ever since we started that, hey, toilet bowl, not toilet bowl, I'm sure he'll take it, and it'll be even sweeter to take down a toilet bowl veteran in Stephen Lowen.
Yeah, I mean, if he wins, I'm gonna go there and TP his house. So
there you know. All right. Well, hey, if you can check out all those results, all the players that led to those results again on the fantasyruckers.com. All of that has been updated. Pretty exciting stuff. But let's shift on over to the round 15. That obviously lended itself to that exciting round of Fantasy MLR.
Yeah.
Lots of good rugby. Obviously, just had 2 teams on bye there. It was the Dallas Jackals on bye and the Nola Gold. Both teams, maybe not so much Dallas, but Nola Gold obviously needing that bye. A little bit of struggles there. But let's shift on over to the matches and talk about it. We'll open up with the New England Free Jacks taking on the Toronto Arrows. A tale of two sides on this one. Dominant victory again. New England continues to roll and prove why they believe that they're the best team in not only just the Eastern Conference, but the entire league. It's starting to really look that way. Obviously, discussion can be had after a pretty dominant San Diego Legion performance that we're getting into. But hey, they take care of business. 57-20 over the Toronto Arrows. Really not even close. Everything with the New England Free Jacks was rolling. Set piece was rolling in this one. It was a pretty big slaughter for this New England Free Jacks team over the Arrows.
Yeah, I mean, Toronto never even had a shot. I was watching, and sometimes Toronto just looks like a high school team out there, and it just kind of looks ridiculous. The one shining bright spot, and we'll get to it, is Tuola Tasi. He was probably their only shining light there. But yeah, New England Free Jacks are just literally pounding the crap out of the rest of the Eastern Conference. They don't care, second place to the last place of the Eastern Conference. They are doing it all. They're treating them all the same, and that's called equality.
and that's called equality. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it. I guess the biggest storyline outside the big time victory and them clinching the playoffs with this win is probably the return of Bodine Waka into the starting lineup.
Yeah.
First time he's making an appearance in the starting line, not at the fly half position, but at the full back position. Reese McDonald stepping out, Potro staying at that fly half position. He looked pretty solid in this one.
Yeah, he looked solid. I thought he started the game off a little bit more of a distributor. Once he got some space, once the game kind of opened up, he obviously had that big run, that big try assist to Mitch Wilson. And he obviously had the other try assist with a nice crossfield kick. But
just classic Waka stuff.
Yeah, classic Waka stuff right there. So that was good to see. It's kind of nice to see him back in form. It'll be interesting, like we brought up earlier in the show, about what they do later on. Are they going to test Waka at 10? Did they like what they saw last week to keep him at 15? Keep the kicking duties with Potros? We'll see what happens there. But yeah, it was nice to see him kind of back in form, because the last time he suited up, he sucked.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about some of his individual performances. We'll get to Walk and what he was able to do from a fantasy perspective. But let's start off with the big man Mil Sanarivi doing some big time stuff. 2 tries, 65 meters gained, 9 tackles. Obviously, a big benefactor of the set piece that New England had rolling in this one, but a total of 18.2 fantasy points, his best performance of the season up to this point. When any front rower can get even above 10 points, you're going to be happy with that type of
Yeah, I mean, I think this is more has to do with the fact that Toronto's set piece is so brutal. I mean, Toronto's set piece defense, Toronto's set piece offense. We saw, and this was brought up on Twitter, that they're going for points rather than going for the corner when they're down by, when they're facing New England Free Jacks. What's the point? What's 3 points going to do when you're facing New England Free Jacks as a last place team? Clearly, they're not confident in the offense of their set piece. Their defense of their set piece on their goal line isn't that great either, and I think Sanarivi just really reaped the rewards from this.
Another forward that did really, really well, Slade McDowell, 2 tries in this one, 40 meters gained, 11 tackles, a breakdown steal as well, 20.3 fantasy points in this one. This is now back-to-back weeks that he's had double-digit point performances. He had 10 points last week. Slade McDowell really taking advantage there at the back row position.
Yeah, that back row is just ridiculous, and we're going to at least talk about one of them every week. And it's just the way it is. It's just how good that back row is. I mean, there's not much else to say about it.
And now with John Poland out with injury, Kieran McLeay coming in there and doing business and getting into that starting position, 3rd start of the season, stepping in for Poland, and he takes full advantage of it. He got that try, 67 meters gained, 3 try assists for an 18.1 fantasy point performance, his best of the season.
Yeah, I mean, he had a classic 9 performance. He slotted in perfectly. He basically was a perfect replacement for John Poland. That's exactly what John Poland's been doing the past couple weeks. You're happy to have him slot in and bring him, but they're still looking forward to having John Poland back in that.
And last guy I want to mention, Mitch Wilson, before we get into Bodine Waka. 1 try, 100 meters, 4 tackles. A lot of that coming off of that big time try from that was distributed by Bodine Waka. A total of 16.7 fantasy points. Pretty solid performance by him. And speaking of Bodine Waka, in this one, 75 meters gained, 2 try assists. His first fantasy points of the season. He appeared once before, not starting in that one. Starts in his first time this one at that fullback position, like we mentioned, racking up a total of 12.5 fantasy points. Might be a little bit of a preview of what is to come, at least from a fantasy side of things. Again, like you said, not going to really have to worry about that because John, who was relying on him, he's gone and is into that consolation round now. But nonetheless, Bodine Waka slotting back in, which is pretty interesting stuff. And then last thing I want to mention is the New England Free Jacks set piece. The only reason why I want to mention this is because 7 total fantasy points, the 3 try assists, obviously, plus the offensive bonus point. When you can get that type of point production from your set piece, it's really hard to lose a week. And this one's just so many extra points there. And I think my overall arching thing is when you're putting up 57 points against a team, you're going to have this many type of fantasy performers, right? You're going to have a distribution of points when we're mentioning guys like Mil Sanarivi, like Slade McDowell, like, Kieran McLeay. There's just going to be so many because there's so many points to be had, just means that's going to translate into a whole lot of fantasy points.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also, even more so when you're looking at Toronto set piece, they just have a hard time holding anybody out of that try zone.
Yeah, and the only other guy that you mentioned when we shift over onto the arrow side, it was obviously Tuatasi Tasi with his 2 try performance, 66 meter gain, 11 tackles, 1 steal. Again, nothing that was really spectacular, just really used his body and used his size to get into the try zone.
I mean, that's exactly what you expect from him.
Sure.
He gets the ball, he makes hard carries, and when they're on the goal line, they're going to use him to try and get that gain line, or at least try and get close to that goal. Goal line. So, not much else that you can expect. He kind of just did his thing, and that we've seen every time he's been healthy this year.
And I think moral of the story out of this matchup is that moving forward, I'm playing all my New England Free Jacks guys because it seems like they're hard to stop in this one. Obviously, you're gonna have to look at lineup changes and things like that to see how they approach that moving forward as they have clinched that playoff spot. In Toronto, really, I'm scared of playing everyone, especially with the injury concerns. Obviously, we didn't see Ross Brody in this one. And really the only guy that I'd be confident is Tasi. But if they're not, producing points, it's hard for him to translate
I think for them, we have to look at the other way around. Like, what does that look like for teams that are in less? Are they going to try some new lineups,
Sure.
play some younger guys, get some MLR time for those guys? Because at the end of the day, no matter how many wins they get, they're not going anywhere. So that might be an interesting look too. It's really those guys that are fighting for the playoff spot that we're going to continue to have to play those star guys.
All right, well, let's shift on over to the next matchup of the weekend. Old Glory DC taking on Seattle at home.
Oof.
Old Glory DC starting off relatively quick, getting that first try in. John Rizzo in his first start of the season, scoring off big, starting things off for Old Glory DC. Then it was all really downhill from there, where then it was a Luaina Futi with a magnificent performance that we're going to get into. Probably, if not, it is definitely the performance of the week. Might be one of the performances of the season. After that try or that steal that he had that led to his first try of the match, it was really all Seattle all the way for the rest of that one.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle just dominated. And this is what we've been waiting for. Well, not waiting, but this is what we've expected Seattle to do. And I think these Eastern Conference matchups for these Western Conference teams are a great kind of way for these Western Conference teams to be able to just, let's get a confidence booster. Let's get some tries. Let's get everything moving. Try some new things, because at the end of the day, this Eastern Conference stinks unless you're playing the New England Free Jacks. And, you're going to be able to rack up a nice win and a confidence booster, especially leading into playoffs.
Yeah, 41-19 victory for Seattle. They stay in that race for that top Western Conference spots on the heels of the San Diego Legion, so a big one for them.
And we can't even move forward without, we have to spend a whole time talking about Liana Futi.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy is James Dealey, quotes, props to him, but giving us and telling us that, hey, he's the only player in MLR history to score multiple hat tricks in the same season. I mean, that is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the way that he's not just a guy who finds himself in the right position, but he's a guy where you give him the ball and he's able to create. And you saw him create, guys are trying to tackle him. One guy tries to take him down. Two guys try to take him down. Gets up, keeps going again. And it's just the way that he's able to make something out of nothing and make something where you think it's just going to be a big gain into a try. It's lovely to watch, and I mean, he's a big part of that Seattle offense.
Yeah, showing off his athleticism. Luaina Futi, 3 tries, 156 meters gained for a total of 31.0 fantasy points on the week. Just that one try, I think, really emphasized it to me. When he breaking tackles, getting down, getting back up, still powering through. I think a lot of his in his previous hat trick, if I recall correctly, a lot of those coming off grubber kicks from AJ Alatima. So obviously showing that he can do it in all different shapes and forms and creating that offense for Seattle. But Luaina Futi, he might be one of those guys that moving forward might be a playoff winner for the league managers that do own him. Shifting on over to another big time player, Martin Iasefo looked pretty solid in this one. 52 meters gained, 2 tries, 8 tackles. This is a guy that's been getting pretty hot towards the tail end of the season, especially from a fantasy perspective. This is now 3 straight weeks where he scored 14 plus points. 5 out of 6 of the past weeks have been double-digit performances. Iasefo was a guy right now I'm really confident in having in my lineup.
I mean, it's confident to see that he can do it from the center position or he can do it from the wing. That's great to see. And honestly, the fact that they didn't even have Dan Creel playing, a guy who's been a force for them, and they were still able to put out this result, and they were still able to generate the type of offense they did, I think that just says a lot about the other guys that they have, and says a lot about Iasefo, the way that he was able to slot in there.
Sure. And then last guy I kind of want to mention on the Seattle side of things is Ronan Foley.
Yeah.
I mean, Ronan Foley obviously had the injury problems happening towards the middle of the season. 73 meters, 1 try, 10 tackles in this one for 15.3 fantasy points. It's now back-to-back 15-plus point performances for Ronan Foley, kind of what we had expected if he was to remain healthy for the entire season. So he might be a guy that, may be making a huge, huge difference now that he's healthy in the Seattle lineup in fantasy playoffs right now.
Yeah, and I mean, the only last guy that I want to bring up from Seattle is we got to talk about AJ Alatima.
Sure.
I mean, the way that he's been able to win back the starting role to a position that we thought was completely lost and we were confused about, mind you. I think this game was one where I saw and I said, this is classic AJ Alatima. Distributor, making the right decisions, setting up tries the way that he always has. Didn't even had 11 meters gained. That's all he needed, but still put up 12.2 fantasy points.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's great to see him back in form, and he's getting back into form, honestly, at the perfect timing, and it looks like he's solidified himself in that number 10 jersey.
Absolutely. All right, shifting over to the Old Glory DC side, we mentioned him early on, John Rizzo, in his first start of the season, scoring that early try, 124 meters. He looked pretty solid for that first 20 minutes, at least, for Old Glory DC, kind of breaking tackles, looking athletic, looking strong. He had 3 tackles, 1 try, 124 meters, like I said, to amount to 18.3 total fantasy points. And then the other guy I want to mention, who has been a guy that has been pretty consistent for this Old Glory DC side and for fantasy managers here this season. William Talataina, he's been great. I mean, he scored a try, 15 meters gain, and a try assist. Only 10.2 fantasy points in this one, but this is his 8th try of the season. He's been a pretty big scoring machine. 9 of the 11 past weeks have been double-digit scoring for him, and it's his 7th straight week of over 10 points. So not a spectacular performance in this one, but when it comes to consistency, he seems to be a guy that is pretty a guy that you're able to rely on pretty consistently here in the fantasy world.
Yeah, I mean, I thought one of the interesting things for me was it was good to see Tito Diaz-Bonilla back in the number 10 jersey. I thought it was interesting they're trying out a few things. I guess Graydon Bowd at 12 because he has been playing well. I don't think that played out as well for Graydon Bowd. I mean, he had an okay week, 7.9 points, but yeah, I think it was good to see Tito Diaz-Bonilla still not having that great of a week, 8.4 points, but it was okay. I think this kind of the fact that we don't have too many guys to talk about just shows kind of the performance from the Old Glory DC.
And that playoff Eastern Conference race, despite it, Matt, like you've been alluding to all episode long, that it is a pretty tough one to watch. But nonetheless, though, that Eastern Conference race is still coming down to the wire. So when you're talking about those playoff teams that are still hunting it, that are still going to be putting out their best lineup, or at least what they think gives them the best chance to win, those are the teams that you're going to be looking for. Old Glory DC, Rugby New York, who we'll get into, Rugby Atlanta, who we'll get into as well. But that is an interesting kind of dynamic to watch. Where is Tito Diaz-Bonilla going to slot in there? Are they going to continue to go with him back at the 10? Graydon Bowd, during that little winning stretch, it was him at that 10 spot. So we'll see how that kind of shifts moving forward. Because obviously at the start of the season, it's kind of crazy how it's shifted so drastically. As Tito Diaz-Bonilla was one of those guys that was thought to be one of the marquee 10s in the fantasy world.
Top 5 even.
Yeah. Top 5, yeah, exactly. All right, so final score there, 41-19, Seattle getting the dominant win there. Shifting over now to the next matchup, Houston taking on Chicago. This one was an interesting one because I feel like Houston has done this pretty consistently all season long. Where Chicago went up to the early 7-point lead, I believe, and then Houston, it was all them all the way. And then they seemed to make things harder on them than they needed to make, allowing Chicago to slowly crawl back into things. Now, mind you, a lot of the Houston tries, I shouldn't say a lot, at least a couple of them were due to some pretty big errors from the Chicago side of things. I mean, the one that sticks out to me is that it almost looked like it was going to be a beautiful thing. Luke Carty with that little chipper kick over the top, catches it on his own, is about to offload it and offloads it right to Robbie Povey, who takes it to the house, I believe, from that. So just giving away certain points. But nonetheless, Chicago finds themselves, I believe, at the end, tied with them, I believe, right? Was it tied?
Yeah, it was tied right to the
33
end.
33.
Gideon Van Vyk,
comes through at the clutch.
Obviously.
And it's funny because Houston in that tight Western Conference playoff race with the Utah Warriors. I mean, not a lucky try because obviously it was dynamic. It was a solid scored try, but lucky to get that one in the last minute to kind of save or at least keep yourself in the playoff conversation. But incredible that's happening against a team called the Chicago Hounds. You wouldn't expect Houston to find themselves even in that situation in the first place.
I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, Houston dug themselves the hole. You look at three of the tries that Chicago Hounds scored. At the end of the half, Luke Carty takes a quick tap, right? They're standing there as if they're going to put it out. Takes a quick tap, does something cheeky, which I love. Taps it, passes it to the outside, easy, try it. The next one, penalty try, right? What are you doing? That's going to end up a penalty try. It was a clear scoring opportunity. There's no point in doing that. And then the last one, I mean, again, they're sleeping. Luke Hardy pretending like he's going to go for touch. Crossfield kick, score. And again, cheeky, but it ends up at the way that Houston is just falling asleep at the wheel, and they think that they're safe with the lead, but they're not even safe to make to the playoffs.
And I guess that kind of also emphasizes the point on the Chicago Hounds side of things about the way that they kind of create their offense. They don't really conventionally are able to create those, consistent offensive scoring opportunities.
Don't get me wrong, Chicago still stinks, okay? There's a lot of things that stink in the Eastern Conference, and Chicago's one of them.
All right, nonetheless, 40-33 victory for Houston. Let's start talking about some of these individual guys. Gideon Van Vyk, I guess, is the guy that we got to talk about because, I mean despite...
I was thinking this on the weekend. I was like, who would you rather have, Reichert Hadding or Gideon Van Vyk this season?
Yeah.
And you look at the two, and you look at the tries, I'm pretty sure they're fairly close. Gideon Van Vyk has had, the hat-trick the last game, 2 tries this game. And he just finds a way to break tackles and always, it's not the same way Reichert Hadding is kind of finding himself in the right position. It's just Gideon Van Vyk gets the ball and you can't stop him. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had another amazing performance coming off the game from last week.
Yeah, 2 tries, 70 meters gained, 19.7 fantasy points, like you said, coming off of that 20-point performance last week. And then the guy, and I guess we should mention this, is we did when we were talking about our show or talking about this matchup and previewing it last episode. We were expecting sort of a low-scoring matchup. Obviously, David Coates not in lineup after getting injured. Thought that might put a shakeup of things. Obviously, Chicago not being able to create things for them kind of turned out to be the opposite. But a large part of why it became the opposite was Robbie Povey. I mean, stepping up in that 10 role, doing absolutely fantastic. 1 try off of that steal from Luke Carty, 85 meters gained, 2 try assists, 5 conversions, 24.7 total fantasy points in his first start of the season in that replacement for Davey Coates. Big reason why Houston was able to put up the number of points that they had. Yeah,
I thought he played really well. I thought he was a really good distributor as well as, obviously with the 5 conversions, you're always going to do well when you kick 5 conversions. Yep. But kind of temper the expectations. A lot of those points probably came off that one pick where Chicago kind of threw their hands up in the air and just stopped playing. So temper that. But yeah, at the end of the day, he did play well. Fantasy impact, let's not expect that week to week.
And then on the Chicago Hounds side of things, hard to find really any fantasy point performers when a lot of those tries are just kind of cheeky tries going in. But I guess there's 2 players. Matai Loita on Chicago, 99 meters, a try, 7 tackles. I mean, he fought his way through to the try line on that one to tie up the game, which was pretty impressive. And then Chris Mattina with the hands on the outside, catching that kick there on the wing and being able to get that one down was pretty big too. 15.1 fantasy points for him, 18 for Matai Loita. So on the Chicago side of things, a couple, but I think this is your typical. We talked about this.
Yeah,
I don't think you're trusting many of these Chicago guys, and to be honest, I'm not trusting really anyone on that side. That we've named a couple names before. There's Billy Meeks that we've talked about. I don't have it down on what he was able to do in this one. If you could pull that.
Yeah, I mean he's got the classic meters gained, 79 meters gained, and one breakdown steal. For a consistent 12 points or 11.9 points. It's consistent you're going to get from him, but it's still the Chicago.
It's just hard because I think, and we've discussed this on this podcast before, is that you're not going to have those explosive weeks with these Chicago Hounds players because you have the baseline with Billy Meeks, but they're just not able to score tries conventionally in the offense that they put out. So you're not going to get that 17-point performance instead of the 12-point performance. You're not going to get the 20-point performance because they're just not scoring enough. So you're having Billy Meeks in your lineup. Just expect that he's the consistent guy for you in your lineup, and he's not the guy that's going to win you the week necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, the only last guy I'll bring up from Chicago, I thought Luke Carty played a really good game. We talked about him. His influence on them coming back was huge. He plays a good game. He gets good stats for a 10, 11.9 points for a 10. I was kind of had to do a double check because it's the same as Billy Meeks, but 11.9 points for a 10, 2 try assists, 3 conversion kicks. You love to see it, but yeah, to your point, Chicago Hounds, stay away. They stink.
All right, shifting on over to the next matchup of the weekend. Vandy probably pretty happy with this one. Utah beating Rugby Atlanta 28-12. And what was it was Utah getting business done, right? Yeah. It was just a consistent 80 minutes played by them, really playing solid defense, only allowing the 12 points for Rugby Atlanta. Fast start by Utah. They just looked like they were good. And I will say, They were damn lucky at the end there to be able to score that last minute Thomas Tonga, I believe, Thomas Tago on there at the end, scoring that last minute try to give them the bonus point to keep them tied with the Houston SaberCats in that Western Conference playoff race. Despite having the better record, it keeps them within, I believe, it's 33 points in the standings up to this point.
Yeah, no, it was good for Utah to get that. I think that they need to put a little bit more out there against a struggling Rugby Atlanta side. I thought they had to do more. And I think this game kind of showed that, look, yes, they played great. Yes, they had the ability, but they should be dominating sides like Rugby Atlanta because Rugby Atlanta is not that great of a squad.
And I guess that's the difference between some of these teams that we see. When we see, San Diego, when we get into the game that they played, or when we get into the New England Free Jacks, when these top tier teams in this league play the ones that are struggling, they make a statement and they don't take their foot off the gas pedal. They put up the points. And I think that's what separates those kind of top tier teams from these like middle of the pack type teams that we're seeing.
Yeah, I will bring up one thing before we get onto the points. Angus McClellan, 75th cap, I think the most capped MLR player in MLR history.
Wow.
As a front rower, has not missed a game.
That's impressive.
He has been on the team for. So very impressive as a front rower. And congrats to him. I mean, that's huge.
All right, well, let's get into some of those individual guys. I mean, the guy that we got to talk about, right? Because now he's established himself, after a little bit of a lull for a little bit. Joe Mano.
I mean, he's now the top point scorer in our Fantasy Ruckers League.
Yeah.
He's past JP Duplessis. He's on a bye week, so it doesn't really mean much. But
had Nate Oxberger, who played this week now.
Yeah, ahead of Nate Oxberger too. So that's a big week for Joe Mano, and I mean, he went off.
Yeah, one try, 122 meters, a try assist, 10 tackles for 22.2 fantasy points. He leads the MLR in tries. I believe it was 12th try over the weekend. He's almost this year's Ed Fido, I would say, honestly. So it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of translates into his fantasy value, which obviously we'll talk about in the offseason next year, because obviously that inflated Ed Fido's of fantasy value heading into this season. So we'll see whether or not the same thing happens to him. You mentioned that Matt, he's now the number one fantasy MLR player in all fantasy players in the entire league. Third straight week with 20 plus points, which is incredible. Joe Mano, when you have his explosive ability, the way that he's able to score tries, he's having a fantasy season to remember.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we talk about him every week, so we don't even have to say anything more.
All right, Calvin Whiting, next guy. Pretty solid performance by him. 67 meters, a try, 17 tackles for a 17.8 fantasy point performance. His third straight week with double digits, back-to-back with 17-plus points. Calvin Whiting, when you're adding the tackles, when you're adding his ability to potentially score a try there, he's a guy that's becoming a big staple here for this Utah team.
Yeah, I mean, every time he starts, he has a game. And that just means that he's really solidified that 12 jersey, and you can anticipate to see him in your lineup or in the Utah lineup moving forward. And I would be hard pressed to take him out of my lineup if I had him on my squad, just because of the form that he's in at the moment.
Yeah, and the only other guy I really would like to mention here on the Utah Warriors side, just because I think we need to emphasize, even though he may have not scored a try this weekend, he's still pretty solid and consistent when it comes to fantasy points. But Caleb McEnany, 123 meters gained in this one. Add the kicking responsibilities, which we were talking before. It's kind of interesting, the split duties between Joel Hodgson and Caleb McEnany, which kind of makes it tough there, because obviously that points gets diminished if you didn't have him as your kicker. 3 conversions for him, but 15.6 fantasy points. Caleb McEnany, I mean, he's pretty solid, and then that's without that try scoring.
Yeah, but I mean, we talk about Joel Hodgson as well with splitting the kicking duties. I mean, he doesn't even need it, right?
Yeah, true.
He puts up 16.3 fantasy points, only kicks 1 conversion, gets a try, yes, but at the end of the day, 2 try assists, 39 meters gained, 8 tackles, 2 turnovers, unfortunately. But, I think Joel Hodgson is currently in form. If you look at the last few weeks, last 4 weeks he's gotten over 10 points as a 10. You love to see it. And that's with not even that many kicks and conversions and penalties. So I think that's really encouraging to see, and you can see by the way that he's playing that he's doing really well.
And I will say it's also encouraging for this Utah Warriors side, to your point, Matt, when you wanted to see more and you think you can expect more from this Utah Warriors team, the fact that there were this many fantasy point performers too, I'm pretty confident moving forward here playing a lot of my Utah Warriors guys, because they do have that ability to score a whole bunch of points. Shifting on over to the Rugby Atlanta side of things, unless there was another guy on Utah that you wanted to speak about. Sidney Tobias. I mean, this guy, ever since he joined Rugby Atlanta, has been a pretty big staple. I mean, as a front rower, 111 meters gained. This is back-to-back weeks where he's ran more than 80-plus meters as a front rower, which is crazy to think about. 15.4 fantasy points when you tack on those 6 tackles. Back-to-back double-digit fantasy point performances for him. Again, 80 meters plus in both of them. Yeah, this is a guy that I'd be picking up possibly because he's a staple and he seems to show that athleticism from the front row position, which you don't often get in the world of fantasy and point production.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to get into that in the waiver wire, but we'll see.
All right, and then the next guy for Rugby Atlanta, and another guy that I think is going to be on our waiver wire conversation, Jack Shaw. I mean, I feel like he's that guy that's on the cusp, and no one really wants to touch him because he's on Rugby Atlanta. But I mean, a try, 69 meters, 5 tackles in this one. Nothing crazy, 13.4 fantasy points, but this is now 6 straight weeks of double-digit fantasy point performances. 5 straight weeks, I believe, if you don't count that little injury break that he had in between with that match that he had before. But nonetheless, though, Jack Shaw, who is also in our free agency, I think is a guy that people will need to be looking at as well. Anything left in this matchup that you want to talk about?
No, I think that's it.
All right.
I mean,
let's shift on over to the last matchup of the weekend then, the lone Sunday matchup, San Diego taking on Rugby New York at home. Dominant 36-13 victory. I mean, San Diego looked fast. They looked good. We had questions a little bit about some of the performances that they had kind of building up to this one, but I was really impressed with the way San Diego played in this one.
I mean, look, I tweeted this out, I think 5 minutes into the game, and I basically called the performance that he was about to have. And I think the big reason why San Diego has looked the way that they have is that Richard Judd is not in the lineup. And Richard Judd is just... You look at every time that he's on the field, every time he plays, the way that he's able to move the offense, his delivery, how quick his delivery is, how quick he's at the breakdown.
Right.
I think that's the big thing for the San Diego Legion offense. That's what makes him deadly. Once they start picking up the pace of play, no team can keep up with them. And that's where they become real lethal, and that's where they become the San Diego Legion offense that we know and we love watching. And I mean, I called it 5 minutes in, no big deal, and he ends up going off. So yeah, it's not that I'm like the whisperer or something, but I might be. But yeah, it was dominant from San Diego. New York never really stood a chance. New York, they really couldn't crack the San Diego Legion defense. And honestly, Sam, we talk a lot about the San Diego Legion offense a lot, but you take a look at the San Diego defense a lot and look at some of their goal line stands. Is that New York, while they were very one-dimensional, San Diego Legion had to be there and hold them up and take a lot of hits and had to make that goal line stand, and they did. And I thought that was really impressive moving forward.
And I mean, it's not a coincidence that your 2 top teams in each of the conferences, plus the 2 teams that now most recently have clinched their playoffs, are also 2 of the most best defensive teams in the league there. Obviously, the New England Free Jacks defense is on a whole nother level. San Diego's defense is pretty solid as well, like you mentioned. They just make they make scoring look easy. I mean, you look at some of those phases, and it's just it's picture perfect rugby at some points. And I would even say that it looks more picture perfect. And I think that's why there's this hype around San Diego over the New England Free Jacks, because when they have those moments, I see more of those moments in San Diego than I do with the New England Free Jacks at times. So we'll see whether or not that kind of translates into how far these teams go into the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about some of these individual guys, and let's talk about Richard Judd. I mean, I think the biggest thing that everyone's going to look at from this matchup was the stiff arm. He made, I don't know who it was, but he made whoever it was, and made it look silly. And when you're getting, when a 9, a scrum, I mean, we both played scrum apps. I don't think we've ever done that in our career. I don't think we can do that in our career.
If the guy's really small, maybe,
but not like that, because Richard Judd made easy work of that with that stiff arm. And if I wish I could reward him for points with that, because I mean, for that I would give him the point performance that he had, but he didn't even need it. 85 meters gain, 2 tries, 12 tackles, 22.6 fantasy points. Impressive stuff.
I mean, the other big thing with him in the lineup is the fact that when you watch him on defense, he's playing in the line. You don't usually see that from a 9, but he's playing in the defensive line, so he's coming up and making tackles. And he's actually fairly aggressive with the way that he's playing defense, which is great for fantasy and great for me. But
I can believe you that when I was in 9, there was nowhere near I was getting near that line. Not whatsoever. I'd be that last line defense, and even then, it was going to be some sort of jersey tackle that was going to be happening and holding on to dear life. Another guy we'll talk about, Thomas Aoki, or Awake, I think is how you pronounce it.
Not Steve.
124 meters, 1 try, 7 tackles, 20.5 fantasy points. 8 of the last 9 weeks now have been double-digit fantasy points performance for him. I feel like he's a guy that's kind of been under the radar. We haven't really talked about him much, but I mean, making a statement in this one, and it's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, he came halfway through last year, and I remember picking him up and not getting too much out of him. But then you look at it this year, and it's like, the way that he's playing, he's really come into form. His footwork, the way that he's able to break the line, that has really been great for him, and something that's really attributed to his fantasy rise.
And then 2 other guys that we typically mention here, Mikey Teo, pretty solid performance, 1 try, 89 meters, 5 tackles, 15.9 fantasy points. And then I do like mentioning him when he does make a performance, Samu Malolo. I mean, front row position, 11.3 points, looking strong on the ball, 1 try, 34 meters.
The guy looks like a center every time he carries the ball, so crazy. It's just ridiculous. But I will mention, I said this earlier, San Diego is one of the teams that took a lot of guys off. Nate Oxberger, I think, only played 60 minutes. Will Hooley, I think, only played 60 minutes. I'm trying to think who else came off. I mean, Manonu played the full 80. I don't know what the logic with that is. But, yeah, I think...
Nanu's only going off if he wants to go off. There's no way
that is true. But yeah, it was interesting to see them kind of take guys off once they realized that they probably had this one in the bag, and just the disrespect to New York. Because they're another Eastern Conference team that sucks, and we still have to talk about their guys.
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Talk about a fall from grace, because they were a team last season that we were just all like goo gawing over, because they looked so explosive. Obviously, I had some key departures that they don't have this year.
We're gonna have to have a tough conversation with Cole,
Scudder. That is true. But let's talk about some of the guys that did good, and then you can talk about that. I mean, Brooklyn Hardiker, pretty solid. I mean, a lot of that coming off of that 1 try, obviously, that he scored, but a try, 77 meters, 8 tackles, 15.1 fantasy points in his first start of the season. A guy I want to talk about, Jason Emery. I mean, he's a guy, fly half position. He's taken over at that 10 role ever since the injury of Jack Hayden. Obviously, they feel more comfortable with him at the 10 position than they do Sam Windsor. And he's been consistent. I mean, 13 points in this one. Since starting at fly half, his 5 starts, 4 of them have been above 10 points. And that one that was below 10 points was 9.7. So even then, I would throw that in there as well. So, I mean, Emery has been pretty solid. I think you can rely on him when he's at that fly half position for you to produce you points, at least consistently.
Yeah, that is true. I think he looks good. I would be interested to see, because they haven't been doing that well. I think they still have a chance of making playoffs. And, you know, do you switch that up at some point? Is there a time for them to switch it up? They should look better, even though against a strong San Diego side. They should be looking better, and maybe it's time for them. They need to slot Sam Windsor in, because Sam Windsor did have a lot of good games at 10.
Fair enough.
And
then last guy, at least positively, that I want to talk about. I mean, didn't do anything crazy in this one. 12.7 fantasy points, but Manate Akoi has been pretty solid ever since he's joined this Rugby New York squad at that back row position. 63 meters, 13 tackles, a steal in this one. He's hovered around 10 points in all 4 of his starts for Rugby New York. So I think he's one of those guys that, again, you're looking for consistency. You're looking for a guy to at least get you some points in there. He's a guy that you can slot into your lineup, and you can be dependable on him.
Yeah, I really like the way that he's been playing. I think he's a high energy guy and seems to always try and get involved, which is good. I did want to bring up a guy, because he finally made his way back into the lineup, Pago Haini.
Okay.
I mean, he finally finds his way back into the lineup after I don't know how many weeks. It seems like this is what happens. He comes back in the lineup, he gets hurt. He leaves, he comes back in the lineup, he gets hurt. He leaves, and he comes back in the lineup, and he gets hurt. And it happened again today. And he's a guy that, I mean, he has such potential in fantasy wise, but you're just so scared. One of those players where you're so worried about them getting hurt. You never. What's the point of even starting?
Right.
But I hope he's on the mend for the 5th time this season.
And what do you got to say for Co?
Oh, we're gonna have to have a conversation with him. You know, he talked a big game start of the year, how they're focused, how they're keeping that championship mindset. Well, I don't know what mindset are you, but hey, they can still make playoffs. They can still technically win it all.
I mean, we've seen it in all the power sports.
Who knows? Maybe they sign some guys. But I don't know.
Okay, well, just to put in context, in the NBA's going right now, you have a Miami Heat team that was the 8th seed that made it to the finals.
Yeah.
In hockey, you got a Florida Panthers team that was a 8th seed that made it all the way to the finals.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe this is the theme of it. Rugby New York making it into that last playoff spot and making it right to the finals.
You know, this should be more like the last place team in the league winning the Stanley Cup.
That's true.
Because that's how New York's been playing.
That is true. But all right, well, let's shift on over here. Again, an exciting round 15 of rugby. Lots of fantasy points to be had, which always makes for an exciting fantasy week. Couldn't come at a better time with it meaning so much. Getting MLR stats and Dankus Anchors into that semifinal against you and Rugby Morning. Should be exciting stuff. We're going to preview the round 16 to come in just a second here, but let's talk about a little waiver wire here first quickly. Kind of mindset and approach. I mean, now you're a part of it. You don't get a bye anymore.
Nope.
You're now in the thick of things.
Yeah.
For me, you're sticking with your guys. And this is a week that has all 12 teams are playing. 6 total matches. No team is on bye, so there's no shortage of players for you to select from.
Yeah.
I'm really only looking at the waiver wire if there's really a hole that you blaringly need. Because I think if I go with any of those other guys that, outside of ones that I've been, depending on all season long, that have got me to this point, I'd be kicking myself if that's the line of decision.
Let's look at it a different way. That you've got your guys, which means all the guys that you wouldn't start and are on your bench should be expendable.
Sure. That's a good point.
All right. So everybody on my bench is expendable in case there's any risk that I need to cover. For example, Jason Potros. He's the 10. Is he going to be starting next week? Do I need to figure out a cover for him?
Right.
I already sorted that this week. I picked up Sam Windsor as a cover. Probably should have picked up Povey, but hey, it is what it is. But I think you need to use the waiver wire now to cover potential risk. Who can you get before before free agency opens and free bidding opens? Who can you get in your lineup to ensure all your handcuffs? Like, let's have a handcuff ready for every guy that could be a risk, every position that could be a risk.
Right.
Or even a position where you think, I'm not that confident in. I think that's the way you got to look at the waiver wire. If you're in the toilet bowl, hey, just go crazy. But if you're in the playoffs, in the actual playoffs, I think that's the way that at least I'm going to be looking at the waiver wire. And if the other guys want to win, that's how they should be looking.
And I guess that emphasizes the whole notion about these top teams, and as we progress through the playoffs here, more of that is going to get solidified, which is going to mean more lineup changes, more things that you may not be as dependable on if San Diego Legion starts to go with different lineup guys, if the New England Free Jacks start to go with more lineup guys. You need to have that when those starting lineups do come out. There's a little bit of shocking change, or even for the bottom tier teams like you talked about. If there's a guy that you depend on the Dallas Jackal, maybe Billy Meeks, you had him, and all of a sudden he's out of the lineup because Chicago Hounds are out of things. Yeah. Like the Dallas Jackals, like the Toronto Arrows, like if some of these teams start to really test out the waters with some of the younger guys, you want someone that you can slot in. And then also I think I want to mention that we've been mentioning for the past couple weeks here for league managers is that don't save your fab anymore. There's no reason for you to save it and wait for free agency to open. Start spending that, even if it's for a guy that you wouldn't have spent that type of money on earlier in the season. Now's the time to do it because it's not like it rolls over to next season at all. Once the season is done, there's going to be no use for it. So there's no reason why you should be ending the season anything but $0.
Yeah, agree on that. But I think the other thing, so when we're talking about picking up guys that you might need to handcuff, this is going to also come down to matchups.
Sure.
We're going to get into some of these matchups later, but look, there's a few teams that I would be looking out for. Houston SaberCats facing Toronto Arrows. Mm-hmm. San Diego Legion facing Chicago Hounds. And New England Free Jacks facing Rugby Atlanta. I'm not even going to say Rugby New York facing Dallas Jackals because that's how unsure of I am with this Rugby New York team and how confident I actually am in this Dallas Jackals team.
All right. Just as confident as you were with his Nola Gold side.
Exactly.
All right. A couple guys I want to mention that are on the waiver wire kind of radar here. I'm going to mention him again. Jack Shaw.
Yep.
He's been consistent. I know he faces a tough New England side this week, so maybe you're tempering your expectations, but I feel like I say that every single week, and Jack Shaw finds a way to get 10-plus points. I will mention, we did say Sidney Tobias is another guy that is in that realm, especially if you need a front rower. But one guy I want to kind of maybe is kind of an interesting one is Threaten Palamo. I want to say him as well, just because he may not have a performance this week, but we did see Kurt Baker leave with injury early on in the game. It was Palamo that came into that starting role. So if you want a guy that you may predict or expect to be in that starting lineup due to that injury concern, he might be a guy that'd be slotting in there, which may be an interesting one.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I mean, for me, honestly, it's a tough waiver wire. I do think that if you need a guy, Adrian Carell is somebody that you can look at, but they're facing the Utah Warriors. Utah Warriors are a good side. But I think for me, it's kind of a tough one for me to look at. I think maybe Tavita Tamalau, right, facing the Chicago Hounds. I mean, he's usually been starting at 8, and you can expect a pretty big game from the 8-man when they're having a dominating performance. But yeah.
Again, these are all guys that are break in case of emergency type situations. You know what I mean? You know your lineup heading into this weekend. I think you know your lineup. I know Fitzy knows his lineup. I know MLR Stats for the most part knows his lineup, especially with no buys. I know Hokie knows his lineup. The thing is whether or not there are any of those last minute changes, you have a guy that's available that forces your hand to play some of these guys. I don't think any of these guys are just automatically slotting your lineup because they're a big time pickup or anything like that. But all right, let's shift on over to some of these games in this round 16 that is going to decide who is going to be competing in our second ever Fantasy MLR Championship. It all starts off on June 2nd. Rugby Atlanta taking on the New England Free Jacks at home. Again, I think this just follows the same kind of mantra that we had going into the New England Free Jacks match last season. You're playing all your New England Free Jacks players. Really, there's not many guys on Rugby Atlanta that I'd be really comfortable playing.
Yeah, I mean, you have the classics of Ruida Biddle. You have the Tarangatira Waitokia. You have the Johan Momsons of the world, those guys. But, yeah, I think Rugby Atlanta's going to have a tough time against this New England Free Jacks side, no matter what type of side they put out. We saw that even without John Poland. We saw that without guys like Reese McDonald. They can still put on a performance. Maybe expect a little less of a squad or a top squad from the New England Free Jacks, just their position, but they're still going to want to go into the playoffs kind of on a roll, keeping that momentum going.
Sure. Yeah, I'm predicting New England in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to call it New England Free Jacks.
All right, second matchup of the weekend, Old Glory DC traveling to New Orleans to take on the NOLA Gold. Big playoff implication in this one. Obviously, NOLA has been struggling a little bit. They're kind of falling off from that playoff race, but Old Glory DC, they can't afford to be giving away any matches and ones that they should win. This is one that they should win if they are truly that second seed playoff team, because again, Rugby New York is right on the tails of them. This one should be an interesting one. I think I'm comfortable with playing my Old Glory DC.
I think it's gonna be a
consistent
tight one.
Guys. I think it's gonna be tight. I think it's going to be high scoring, kind of a back and forth affair between these two teams. I think I'm pretty confident in both sides of it, honestly. Playing the marquee guys on NOLA. If Tom Florence is in line, I'm getting him in. JP Duplessis in that one as well. Rodney Iona in this one if he's starting. And then same thing for Old Glory DC side. I think the biggest thing to kind of look out for is that 10 position with the Old Glory DC. Do they stick with Tito Diaz-Bonilla at the 10? Do they go with Graydon Bowd? That'll have implications there. But again, I think guys like Jama, I'm playing him. Talataina, I'm playing him. Really, really confident. And they're fantasy points to be had in this matchup.
Yeah, I think so too. And it'll really be a hard-hitting match because this one has a lot of playoff implications, and they know it too. So yeah.
And the big guns are going to start in this one.
Yep, 100%.
All right, I'm going to go Old Glory DC in this one, I think.
I'm going NOLA Gold. I'm sticking with the boys. They can still make playoffs, like we said. Even the last place teams can win the Stanley Cup.
All right. Houston SaberCats traveling north of the border to take on the Toronto Arrows. Should be interesting one in terms of, we always have to put in that X factor when teams head up to Canada and play in Toronto. We saw there to be a vulnerable side of the Houston SaberCats, which they've had pretty much all season long. Can Toronto take advantage of that? I'm not too sure. I'm playing all my Houston guys in this one, especially Gideon Van Vyk. Interesting to see where Robbie Povey, David Coates' situation comes in. I'm expecting Povey to be back in that starting role. But outside of that, Toronto Arrows side, not really confident in playing many of those guys. Maybe Tassi. Outside of that, obviously if Ross Brody starts, you put him in your lineup. But he hasn't consistently been in the lineup for this Arrow squad so far. So really, at least marquee guys, Tassi's one.
Yeah, I think Houston's gonna definitely show up and definitely you'll be able to have those guys playing. I think who will have a big game, I think, is Tuilofeti.
Okay.
I think the Houston set piece and Tuilofeti is going to have a big game. So good for Steven. Sucks he's in the toilet bowl. So yeah, I don't even know if he has him or not. But I actually think this is going to be a close matchup. This is going to be similar to the Chicago Hounds Houston Sabercats matchup from last week. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to go with the Arrows.
Really?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Arrows.
Okay.
Just because I think Houston has this way of being able to just blow it for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's actually the Toronto Arrows calling me right now saying, "Hey, look, thanks for going with us. We're gonna put you on the field to make sure that doesn't happen."
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, for this one, I think the Houston Sabercats are going to win this one. But points are points, and I think they're going to be garbage time points where Houston pulls away ahead. They allow a little bit, they ease up a little bit towards the end there. The Toronto Arrows kind of crawl the way back into it. Man, pick up the phone, dude.
I don't want to see them lose. I'll make them lose. That's what's gonna happen.
All right. Shifting on over to the next matchup of the weekend. The San Diego Legion going to Chicago to take on Chicago. Same mantra I think I have here with the whole New England Free Jacks Rugby Atlanta thing. San Diego's
I'm literally double back with. If Richard Judd is in the starting lineup, they are going to dominate this game.
Okay.
If Jason Higgins is starting at 9, or for whatever reason they go Nate Augsburger at 9, they are going to... It's going to be a tight matchup where they're going to have to pull one out of the bag. Chicago Hounds team they suck, but they can score points. We've seen that.
In unconventional ways.
Yes. But I think it majorly depends on what type of lineup San Diego Legion puts out. Let's hope they put out the same one and we see some high-scoring rugby from San Diego Legion, because if that's the case, I would be starting all my San Diego Legion guys, and the Chicago Hounds can suck it, essentially.
All right, well, I'm going San Diego Legion. That's why I think you're going to San Diego. All right, Dallas Jackals taking on the New York Ironworkers. Yeah, I think I agree with you, man. I don't think we can have the same mindset with his Dallas Jackals team as we've had in the past.
Well, actually, I don't even think I think we can't have the same mindset that we can have with the Rugby New York team that we've had in the past.
Sure.
I mean, we're looking at the squad, and they struggle. I mean, they struggle quite a bit, and the Dallas Jackals team is coming off, yes, a bye week, but they just came off a big win.
Yeah.
So, away from home, too, and they're away from home here. Yeah, I personally think the Dallas Jacks are going to come away with this. Dallas Jackals defense sucks, so it's going to be a high-scoring affair.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would not be scared to play either of these guys, either Dallas Jackals guys or Rugby New York guys.
Yeah.
But I do think Dallas Jackals might come away with their 3rd win of the season and their 2nd in franchise history away from home.
That's pretty impressive stuff. And again, there's a lot of the confident guys. Adrian Boyson is this one.
Yeah.
Sam Gala in this one.
Tommy Milanos.
Yeah, Tommy Milanos. I mean, on New York's side, it's all dependent on their lineup. Interesting to see
you'll have
what
to
they
see.
go
But
with.
I wouldn't stay away from them. I
Sure.
think there's still guys that you can play and still trust to get you some points.
All right. I'm still going to go New York Ironworkers in this one, especially at their home. You're going Dallas?
Yeah, I'm going Dallas.
All right. Last matchup of the weekend, Utah Warriors taking on the Seattle Seawolves.
Sorry, Andy.
This one's an interesting one because obviously there's a lot on the line here for the Utah Warriors.
Well, Seattle.
And Seattle, sure. More on the line, though, for Utah, I would say. Obviously, a playoff spot on the line. They're tied with the Houston Sabercats. Houston kind of has an easier matchup this week, but according to you, they're not going to get the points that they need, Houston. But Utah, they really need to pull one out of the bag here, but they are away from home in the Seattle side. This should be a good one. I mean, it should be. I think there'll be points had in this one that I think I'd be confident with Seattle guys and Utah guys. I'm not straying away from my Utah guys.
Look, I think there's points to be had. I'm not straying away from my Utah guys. I'm not staying away from my Seattle guys. I think it's going to be a close matchup. I think it's also going to be a high-scoring affair. I just don't think Utah is going to pull out with the win. The Seattle side is, coming into form as we saw last week. And, even if both teams play at their best, I think Seattle still edges Utah out. So,
Sure.
It's unfortunate for Utah. They're running into the Seattle Seawolves at the end of the season where they need the wins the most. And fortunately for Houston, they're running into Toronto at the end of the season where they need the wins the most. So, yeah, it's tough.
Well, you know what? In Vandy's sake, and since he's not here, I will say that I will try to speak it into existence that the Utah Warriors come away with the victory in this one for his sake. Should be interesting, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'll predict even the toilet bowl final, too. Sorry, Vandy, you're going to lose. Just like the Utah Warriors are going to lose this week against the Seattle Seawolves. And, yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of that, yeah, again, this round 16 has a lot on the line when it comes to fantasy implications from the toilet bowl side of things. Vandy is taking on previous toilet bowl winner, I believe, Stephen Lowen, in
toilet bowl champ
in the Feral Hippies. And then, yeah, in our semifinal, couldn't get any tighter than this. Matt, you're taking on Dankus Anchors Hokie. Rugby Morning Fitzy is taking on James Dealey MLR Stats. Interesting, though, that 3 of our 4 finalists are veteran league members.
Well, I'm not surprised. Those new members kind of stunk this year.
Oh, there you go. Calling it out.
Except James.
All right. Well, this time next week, we're going to know who's in our Fantasy MLR Championship, which should be interesting. Obviously, there's that whole charity concept that is on the line. Hopefully, we could try to get them on the show to talk a little bit about what they're expecting in that weekend. Going to be exciting stuff. We'll see whether or not it takes place.
Yeah, we'll see. It's going to be rock and roll versus whoever wins the other matchup, so we'll see. See, that's why they hate me on the Discord.
All right. Well, big talk for the guy here, obviously, but we'll be back next week to break that all down. Enjoy
Hey, quick proposal.
Yeah.
Before we end off.
Okay.
It got brought up by, I think, Derek Brissett, LaRouge Rugby.
Okay.
Can we just have 5 Western Conference teams and just New England Free Jacks in the playoffs?
Okay, since you're bringing it up.
No, we don't have to talk into it a lot. But essentially, Houston's better than all the Eastern Conference teams.
Sure.
Dallas, I would like in there just because...
You just have a soft spot for Dallas now, the underdog story.
They're going to beat the New York Ironworkers, and I think they've beat Old Glory DC, no?
No, that was Old Glory DC coming out because the game was only half long.
Oh, right. So they could have beat Old Glory DC.
There you go.
So basically, yeah. Anyways, the Eastern Conference, at the end of the day, to end the episode, to round it all out, to put a bow on it, the Eastern Conference, once again, stinks.
All right. Well, enjoy the matchups this weekend. Full slate of matchups, 6 matchups to go around, which means lots of fantasy points. Going to decide once again.
Oh, there they're calling again.
Going to decide once again who is going to be in the Fantasy MLR Championship. For Matt... For Ryan, we'll be back next week.
I gotta pick that up, guys.
Have a good one.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.